Welcome to Liberty Action Alert with Greg Seltz, sponsored by our friends at the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty here in Washington, D.C. A program that cuts through the chaos and confusion in the culture today by talking to kingdom citizenship, bold biblical principles for a robust public Christian life. And now your host, Dr. Greg Seltz.
Good day, Washington, D.C., and friends of the program all around the country. I'm Greg Seltz. Welcome to Liberty Action Alert. We are privileged to have on the program today Vincent Wagner, who serves as Senior Counsel with the Center for Parental Rights at Alliance Defending Freedom. Welcome, Vincent.
Thanks for having me here, Greg. Glad to be here.
Listen, what the center talks about doing, its main purpose, its stated goal is to safeguard parents' rights to direct the upbringing, education, and care of their children. So my first question to you is, who would be against this?
Yeah, like a lot of things like that, the devil can be in the details. And so that's what we're finding in the cases we're having to bring is, at a high level, I think everybody would say parents have that right, but it's a question of schools sometimes saying, especially, maybe not here.
Right. Well, okay. So in this case, then you're part of a case, DF versus Harrisonburg City Public Schools. Take us through that case, because this is one of those things where the school board is basically saying, parents will make the decision, not you.
Yeah, and that's right. That's the core issue here is the school board, rather than doing what it should be doing, which is supporting parents in making these decisions for their children about, education, about their kids' identity, those sorts of things. The school board has a policy that is cutting parents out of those decisions. And so here in this case, it's about gender identity and sexuality, where the school board has started implementing a policy that requires teachers, when they hear that when a student says that the student would like to be treated as the opposite sex, the teacher has to do two things. Number one, immediately start treating that student as the opposite sex. The big thing is generally names and pronouns in that situation. Number two, the teacher's not allowed to tell that kid's parents about what's going on in the classroom now. And it goes a step further than that. It actually requires teachers to continue using the student's given name and the student's correct pronouns when speaking with that student's parents, even though the teacher knows that at school the student's going by a name and pronouns that go with the opposite sex. So the flashpoint is forcing teachers to participate in this, but it's forcing teachers to push parents out of the picture. So in this case, we represent a group of teachers and a group of parents. One of the parents is actually also a teacher in the school district. So it presents both sides of the issue here. You have teachers saying, our free speech rights, our freedom of religion, we can't participate in this. And the Virginia Constitution here says you can't make us do that. And the parents are saying, as parents, we have a right to be involved in these important decisions about our kids' lives, and you can't cut us out of those decisions.
So what age group are we talking about here?
Yeah, so this policy applies to the entire school system. Our teachers here are one of them's an elementary school teacher. They're in middle school and high school. So, it's across the entire school system.
Well, and that's, I guess, I almost don't know what to say about this sometimes. And I think one of the reasons why we wanted to have you on, I know you're very busy and you're going to have to go pretty quick here, but we wanted to have you on because we wanted to let parents know, this stuff is in the water. It's not just in this particular school district or that particular school district. It seems to be bubbling up all over the place. And my first question, if I was a parent, would be, when did we flip from a school had to call the parents to administer an aspirin to my child, to now where we hear about they're taking kids oftentimes even to abortion clinics, and now we're even hearing that they're not only participating in this gender transition, but they're willfully deceiving the parents about what's happening with their children. Was there a point in time where we just missed this, or is this just something that now is kind of rolling downhill?
It's been brewing for a couple of years. I think we've gotten over the last couple of years a lot of questions from parents, kind of hearing all over the country rumblings about these sorts of policies being implemented. We first joined we filed a lawsuit along with the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, WIL, in Wisconsin against some school districts there. I think that was in 2020 when that was initially filed. So, it's been a couple of years brewing, and it's been across the country. And I'll say this, it's picking up steam because now the Biden administration is getting behind these sorts of policies. And this is one of the issues that you'll be seeing coming down the pike via the new regulations under Title IX and the rules that apply to sex discrimination in schools, where the Biden administration is saying that these sorts of policies, teachers forced to participate in treating kids as though they're the opposite sex, maybe even cutting parents out. But those are coming as part of a federal mandate.
Wow. So, folks, again, when you vote, this is the kind of stuff we've always said, vote platforms, not people, because the platforms of liberty are those that honor the parents' rights and responsibilities, obviously. But education seems to be one of these areas where not only is it getting murky, but since, we saw this in the pandemic, where if the school board decided we're going to shut down, we're shut down. It didn't matter what the parents thought, didn't matter what the children thought, didn't matter what the science was. And we were sitting there going, can you see how this can become a dangerous situation where they have total control of your children? When you talk about this particular case, then what are the ramifications? I mean, you're basically, you just said two things I think that are very important. Teachers don't want to do this too, because I would not want to willfully deceive a parent, especially if I thought that it was the wrong thing to do personally as well. And then obviously parents who say, hey, that's my child. Are you going to be there on Saturday night? Are you going to be there on Sunday when they're crying and they're struggling? No, you're going to be back home in the safeness of your house, having set this upon my child. What are the ramifications, A, if we lose this case, and then I guess B, if you win this case?
It really is. It's about the stakes of kind of who gets to make these sorts of decisions for kids, because, children are children. They need adults to help them make decisions and guide them through lives. So, the adults and kids' lives are going to be helping them make these sorts of decisions. So it's about who's the primary decision maker. And the presumption has been and should be that it's parents, especially when we're talking about something sensitive like mental health care, like sexuality. In some other cases, we've got cases about, say, race and racial identity. But parents should be making should be involved in those sorts of decisions in their kids' lives. And it shouldn't primarily be the schools. And in this case, it definitely shouldn't be the schools making the decision without even consulting the parents. So I think that's really what's at stake, is who gets to make these decisions for kids and whether or not schools are allowed to cut parents out of these decisions.
And I think you sent a letter early on before this became a case. And I think when I read in that particular letter, one of the things that you cited was a physician who talked about, listen, if you enable, especially prepubescent children in these kinds of things, these things which tend to work themselves out after puberty, if you enable that in the life of my child, you bring way more problems into their life, not less, generally speaking. And again, then they bear no responsibility to that. What is their argument?
Yeah, so we're just now starting to get their responses, kind of the stage of the case. Okay. So that's still a little bit in flux. But, as to your first point about kind of like the experts, it's pretty clear that kids are better off when their parents are supportive and helping them make decisions like these. And one thing you do hear sometimes in these conversations is kind of, this kind of using a different name, dressing differently, that sort of thing. It's kind of downplayed. But experts in this field agree that this is a kind of medical treatment that the schools are engaging in. It's not just kind of, let's try this out and everything will turn out fine. This is actually medical treatment. And so the schools don't really have any business pushing kids into this particular medical treatment without consulting their parents.
Well, especially, we all know that when we were growing up, peer pressure was huge. Peer pressure was never really to do the right thing for us. It tended to always to do the wrong thing. Peer pressure is huge at school. And if your teacher is not in that sense reflecting the role of the parent, that they're an authority figure that tamps this kind of stuff down, who knows what the ramifications to that could be. And I think that's one of the things that parents are really starting to worry about, which is, am I sending my child to school to learn things, or do they think that my child is like their patient and this is therapy? Now, what would, I mean, at this stage of the game, you say we're early on in the process. What's coming next for this? And I know you've got some other cases around the country. What does it look like on the horizon? You said you think that there's kind of a wave of response. Is it because parents are finally waking up to what's going on with a lot of this stuff?
Yeah, as to kind of this wave, we've talked with parents, and there is a lot of, you mentioned COVID earlier, and there was a lot of that. When you're doing distance learning, you really get to see what's going on in the classroom. We've heard from a lot of parents that were surprised at what was going on in the classroom, right, to be honest, kind of in this sort of space. And so I think that is driving some of the responses. Parents, are hearing this, in this case, you have a policy that's actually trying to deceive the parents. So they didn't necessarily have an opportunity in the past to know about this.
Right.
But we do have cases going on elsewhere. I mentioned the ones in Wisconsin that we've got. Those are a little farther along. They're kind of getting in to the case seriously. And in Harrisonburg, we're at the stage where we've initially asked the court to block the school's policy while the case goes forward. Okay. And we're hoping for a good decision on that, maybe sometime this fall.
Even if we win this case, the question I always have is, will they abide by it? How binding are these things? Because I feel like parents are starting to realize, wow, they have our money. They actually run the curriculum, and we can protest against the school board, but they don't really listen to us, and they kind of do as they please. And a lot of times they don't even tell us. So even if we win, tell me what you think would happen if we win. Is it something where it could actually start to put a firewall against some of this stuff for the sake of parents around the country? Yeah,
you're right to kind of highlight the different aspects of the response here. I think that litigation is a piece of this, and it's important. And, victories in the courtroom are wonderful. We saw this summer with something like Dobbs, how important that can be. That's the Supreme Court's abortion decision from earlier this summer. Where they overturned Roe versus Wade, right. But it's not the whole piece. There's a culture shaping aspect to this that is important to us at ADF too, where we want to change hearts and minds on these issues, along with shaping kind of courtroom victories. So that's important to us, and I think that's an important thing for parents to be thinking about as well. Kind of, when they talk to their friends and neighbors about these issues locally, school boards are controlled at the local level. They have the opportunity to vote in those elections. They have the opportunity, if it comes to it, to run for a position on their school board and try to see things change in a positive direction. It doesn't have to stay this way. They can influence the school board to respect parents' rights, I think.
Well, and I appreciate that too. Like I said before, I think, because I've read and I've talked to many, many educators in the public system who are just as frustrated. I mean, it's not just the parents who are frustrated. There are a lot of teachers. Like you said, you represent teachers on these things too. And I guess what I struggle with is all parents want to do is they want to have their children raised and they're educated in a moral, ethical framework that reflects their values. And we've seen even in the pandemic, science doesn't come valueless. And science can be manipulated and used all different ways too, because science just tells us that something is. It doesn't tell us whether it's right or whether it's wrong. So you just said, get the parents ready for this. Maybe they can be more a part of this. They can be a part of the board. They can do all these things. Is this something too where school choice finally is the logical extension in the milieu that we're in?
I think what I'll say on that is, say the families we represent in Harrisonburg, it's a piece of this case that they're saying to the court, that's just not an option for us, that we need the public schools and we rely on the public schools to help us educate our kids. And we shouldn't have to sacrifice our religious beliefs. We shouldn't have to sacrifice our role, in the religious upbringing, because that's part of the Supreme Court cases on parents' rights recognize that this is part of people's religious duty to bring up their children. And what these parents are saying is that, yes, some people can go to Christian schools. That's great. It's not on the table for us for various reasons. So we shouldn't have to lose our rights in order to take advantage of the public schooling option.
Well, and I guess I want to be clear on this too. A moral education, there are a lot of religions and even ethical secular people that I know who hold very similar moral worldviews to the kind of worldview of the Judeo-Christian worldview. So again, sometimes people put us in this box like we're enforcing our religion and our moral views on things, when in reality, I would say this is one of those times where I think this will be one of the arguments, that these are minority students who feel out of place and we have to respect their rights. Well, we're talking about 1%, if that, maybe a little bit more now that it's becoming, avant-garde to actually become a person who changes their pronouns. But we're now saying to this 97%, no, you're going to, these are the values of education. Isn't that what's really part of this lawsuit?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That the parents are saying these ideas about sex and gender, they're not something we can agree with as Christians. The teachers are saying the same thing. We can't agree with these things. We can't promote them by participating in this in the classroom. And the parents are saying they're saying we shouldn't have to send our kids to a school where you're pushing these ideas that are contrary to our religion, our ideas about parenting, our ideas about morality and sexuality. That we shouldn't have to sacrifice those to get this public education. And this is the school's viewpoint on these topics. There are already, you mentioned there are some kind of settled court cases on kind of teachers, college professors in these sorts of settings. And the courts say, this is a viewpoint on a contested cultural issue that the school is taking. The school can't force that viewpoint on teachers. And then what we're saying here, by extension, you can't force parents out of the decision about how that viewpoint is forced on their kids.
I think you're right. And I think one of the things that we see happening in our work on this is it's to obfuscate, not to clarify, because, the he, she, they, it's all rooted in something that is bigger than you. So you are he because you're biologically male. If you go to the doctor, they still have to look at your cells because your cells react to medicine different than the cells of a she. And that's a beautiful thing. That's medicine actually doing better for men, better for women in this whole egalitarianism. And then obfuscating whether you're they or she, which means are you a part of a group or are you a singular person? These were all meant to actually be more specific and help me understand that I'm talking to you. So like you're saying here, there's an obfuscation going on, and then for the school to participate in that, this can't be a good thing. Well, listen, I know we're almost out of time with you. So how can we be more supportive of your efforts? Is this something where people can go find out more about this? Where would they go?
Yeah, ADF Legal, adfmedia.org, but the two different websites that you can learn all about our cases. You can click through to the parental rights cases on those websites. And, as far as supporting us, prayer is powerful, and we covet your listeners' prayer in these cases and all our cases.
Great to have you on, Vincent, today, and we look forward to talking to you after you win the case.
Thanks a lot.
Take care. And now I'd like to welcome back to our program Tim Gaglin, who's the Vice President of Government Affairs for Focus on the Family, a good friend of the LCRL. Welcome, Tim.
Great to be with you, Greg.
Well, what did you think about that conversation?
Very powerful. And Focus on the Family very strongly supports both Alliance Defending Freedom and the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty in this matter. It is very crucial that we go back to first principles. And The first principle at Focus on the Family is that parents are the first teachers, and they have the principal responsibility and the principal blessing and honor to be raising their children in the way that they feel is best. And as was made so clear by Vincent in your conversation with him, Greg, just because children go to school does not mean that somehow that parental authority or responsibility is ipso facto severed. If anything, when our children go into the public square, into public schools, other public institutions, parents do not constitutionally somehow give up those rights. And unfortunately, in the Harrisonburg case and too many troubling similar cases around the country, that's the practical effect.
And Tim, one of the things that I'm really struggling with this because I get letters, even not a lot. I wouldn't say it's the bulk of our church, but I get an occasional letter saying, we are way too concerned about these things. These things are not as big a deal as we're making them out to be. And frankly, it shocks me because And the typical answer, typical argument is because if we fight for things like parental rights, we're getting in the way of our testimony of the gospel in the culture. And first of all, I don't know what kind of gospel is a generic gospel that isn't dealing with the repentance of sin. So if you can't proclaim honor your father and your mother, I don't know that you can proclaim the gospel to someone who's repentant, who's not honored their father and your mother. So again, just getting the 10 commandments now seem to be these mean-spirited words of God that we're supposed to somehow overlook. But it really bugs me when they think that defending this fundamental and not just right responsibility, parents are going to be held responsible by God himself for what they do with their children. Yeah. So again, talk to our church, talk to our people, and say again, this is not only our responsibility. Proclaiming this stuff is part of being a Christian voice in the culture.
At Focus on the Family, Greg, one of the most powerful parts of our ministry is our help desk. This is the place where 24/7, 52 parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, people within a family who have a real concern can call Focus on the Family and say, I need to speak to somebody about this issue or that issue regarding family, marriage, parenting. Here's what is genuinely sobering, and I might say even shocking, that one of the biggest trends that we are hearing at Focus on the Family is parents and grandparents who phone our help desk and say, and I'm giving a variation on what we hear regularly, my son or daughter, my grandson or my granddaughter came home from school today, and they asked me, am I a boy or a girl? That this issue came up in the classroom, that there was a discussion about human sexuality, by the way, often at very young ages, and that not reconfirming, or if I may say, affirming the worldview of the parents or grandparents. Unfortunately, there is a license being taken where there is no objective reality, right, that there are not, the biological male and the biological female.
Right.
And it is an issue which is profoundly confusing and hurtful and has a very deleterious effect on a young person when they go into a classroom and a teacher or a counselor, which, by its very nature, affirms authority, the best kind of authority. And of a sudden, their whole world is turned upside down. That's not objective, Greg. What that is, it's actually taking a side in a culture war, and it is undermining the role of parents and of the family.
Well, the sexualization, that's what DeSantis did down in Florida. He said this is grooming stuff because these kids that are being taught this stuff, sometimes you're talking about second, third grade. You're talking about very young children. And we know scientifically how long it takes for the brain and for the body to work through these things. And they're introducing this confusion at such a young age. We don't need these activists. And I think that's what we're starting to see in school. These activists who say, no, we're going to sexualize your children. And we're going to dare you to stop us. And that should be troubling, like you said, not just to Christian parents. That should be troubling to parents throughout.
This is a new form of theology,
right?
But it's not brand new to the contemporary world. But it's a newer iteration of what at one time was called moral relativism, right, situational ethics. That there is nothing that is objectively true. There's no right and wrong. There's no male and female. There's no such thing really as parental authority. And so to frost young people and to make those kind of incredibly important distinctions foggy at a young age is a moral relativism gone amok.
Well, Tim, thank you very much for being here with us today. This is the Back to School special. Folks, you got to be aware of what's being taught to your children because that is one of the ways that you can keep them close to the Lord and close to your family. So thanks for being with us today, Tim.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in today. To get to know our LCRLDC work better, check out our website at lcrlfreedom.org. Till next time, God bless you always. I'm Greg Seltz. Have a great week.
You've been listening to Liberty Action Alert with Greg Seltz, Executive Director of the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty in Washington, D.C. This program has been brought to you by the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty.